Hello and welcome to our audience to this episode 32 of the Get Out of Your Comfort Zone series. I'm so excited for our guest today. But before I get to that, I want to share that I believe we live in abundance. But what does abundance look like when you are an artist? And is it limited to just financial abundance? That is our topic for today. And that is what we're going to explore with our guest, Nicole, who is a working artist. And where do I even begin? Because words cannot do justice to encapsulate Nicole. She had a nomadic upbringing, growing up in places like Maui, Ecuador, Vermont, South Florida, Mississippi, Philadelphia, and the list just goes on and on. And within a family that cherished art and nurtured creativity. What really struck out to me about her upbringing was her grandfather and the wildlife walks and the bonding and the role that he played in helping her grow as an artist. Nicole is a multi-dimensional artist working in different media. And the wonderful thing about Nicole, one of the wonderful things about her is that she's not even limited to just being an artist, but also a sustainable gardener, an educator, an entrepreneur, and yes, even a home builder. Goddamn. I mentioned this before, but Nicole is a working artist, and she has reached a point in her career where her art also helps to support her financially. And so, without further ado, I would love to introduce Nicole. Hello.
Hello, Lion. Thank you so much for having me. What a wonderful introduction. Thank you.
Cheers, cheers. It came from the heart, and I appreciate all that you shared to help me put this intro together. Before we move on, is there anything that you would like to add to the audience as part of your introduction?
No, I think you pretty much got it right spot on, actually.
Mhm. Well, with that, let's proceed, shall we?
Let's
So,
do it.
um, why don't you regale us with the story of how you and I met?
I would love to. It's such a magical meeting, which I find so many of my friendships and relationships, when they have those kinds of beginnings, are just so lovely to reflect on. So we were at a community art space here in San Francisco called The Fate, and we were at an art opening. And I was wandering around. I had a piece in that exhibition, and so I was wandering around the space and found an open door in the back of the gallery, and found this incredible garden. And as you said before, I am a gardener, and so I had to proceed further. And there were fruit trees and beautiful blooms everywhere. And as I was just like wandering through, there you were, eating an apple from one of the trees in the garden, and everything kind of took off from there, I'd say.
Hell yeah.
Yeah.
Hell. I remember that day. It was such a magical sort of experience for me to sort of, um, you know, um, run into you the way that we did, because I don't remember who like initiated the conversation, but it it just felt so magical. And then to find out that you yourself are a gardener, um, made it even more so. And then to sort of walk a little bit around the garden with you, sort of appreciating some of the details, um, was was very special. And so I'm glad that, we're getting this on tape because now we have a infallible memory of, how we met, which is something that I'm grateful for.
So am I.
Cheers. So with that, um, I earlier in our introduction, I shared how, you had a pretty nomadic upbringing, and even as an artist, you've lived in very many places. But your time in Vermont really resonated with me. And so, can you please tell us a story of your life in Vermont? Paint us a picture. Um, and your grandpa as a retired educator and an artist, and how he influenced you as an artist.
For sure, of course, I'd love to. So I moved to Vermont after living in Maui and Ecuador, and my parents moved myself and my brother there so that way we could spend more time with our grandparents.
Mhm.
And I was about probably 7 when we moved, and we moved to a town called Northfield, which is a small town outside of Montpelier, and um, did some elementary school time there and spent a lot of that time with my grandfather and my grandmother as well. Um, and my grandfather was a man who loved to be outside, valued his time walking in the woods, going fishing, skiing, and that was reflected throughout our entire family. Um, and so when we were spending time with him, he had a attic artist studio and a wood shop, basement wood shop. So whenever we went over to my grandparents' house, we would either be upstairs in the attic learning watercolor, or he would make us these like wood boats that we would take down to the pond, and he would build them for us in the wood shop, and then we would get to paint them and um, do that in between walking through the woods. So he was formative in just like giving me the hands-on experience with materials, but then also as we would walk through the woods, they had a lot of acreage around their house, so we would walk through the woods all the time, looking at trees. He'd teach us how to identify trees and plants and birds. And he was a landscape painter, so he would be outside painting in watercolor and then bring his work back home and paint in oils. So it all was like really formative throughout my whole childhood with him.
Yeah, and you know, one of the things that really resonated me with your story is how um he inculcated this passion for um learning more about nature and botany, um ways in which that you carried on your self-study throughout your life, throughout your schooling, independently, despite having a very busy life. Because, one of the things that I also remember is how growing up, especially, once you were old enough, you were always working jobs while your education was going on. So it's not like you had all this free time, right?
Yeah.
Um, and I also want to bring the audience's
Oh,
I
there you
also
go.
want to, yeah, I also want to bring the audience's attention. I'm going to switch our internet connection real quick to see if we can make things better.
Okay.
I think I'm still here.
Yeah, you are.
And hopefully we'll have better luck. Um, Nicole, are you still with us?
Yeah.
Amazing. All right. Better luck going forward. So um, you you were pretty busy throughout your
Mhm.
schooling, and you still made time for self study. And I think that really resonated with me because it speaks to your passions outside of your art and how those passions then ultimately inspire you to create. And I'd love to sort of bring up one of your paintings or one of your art pieces because I know it's not just a painting; it's block. If you'd like to spend a minute telling us about it.
Sure. Yeah. So I consider you're right on point. I consider the Prince paintings. Um, they're for technical reasons. I still label it as a woodcut print. So this is a relatively new work that I've made, and so in the past I was researching a lot of horticulture and all the branches from composting to seed germination to garden design, all the things, and that would come out in the work. And through that whole entire process, I was also writing poetry. And so this work is a woodcut print that was made using a specific type of typeface to try to integrate language into the prints, um, while still kind of keeping those like earthy, natural colors. This one's more vibrant, maybe, than some of my earlier work, but um, yeah, so that's what this piece is about. This is a 3 by 3 foot piece, so these blocks are rather large. And so what I typically do is I make drawings, and if I like the drawings, then I'll move them onto a block of wood. And with each layer, the drawing is abstract, and then the carving on the wood gets abstracted through the carving process and the cutting process. And so then each of these forms that get used in these paintings, they eventually take on like their own identity in these images. So they have this like sovereign space in my art making practice where they get used over and over again, but they get to like shift over time because I've used them for years and years and years. So these pieces are still like freshly cut and very sharp, but some of the older woodcuts, the wood has like warped and become thinner and cracked and shifted. And so in that way, I kind of look at my practice as like a mirroring of what an ecosystem is, right? And how all these different parts play a role to make like one space. So yeah, so this is a new evolution, but a continuation on my practice.
Hell yeah! Thank you for sharing that. And so with that, you know, no artist is sort of able to grow in the way without mentors. And you were very fortunate to have an amazing mentor as one of your mentors. And so tell us the story of one of your biggest mentors. I believe Ken is the name that
Oh,
I recollect. Oh,
Key Francis. Yeah.
Keith. Thank
Key
you.
Ke, actually. Pronounced like a
Oh,
kiki, but
Keith.
Ke.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay. Thank you.
Yeah, no
Um,
problem.
and paint us a picture of how he came into your life and some of the reasons why your life was so enriched by his presence.
Yeah, sure. Um, so I was in undergraduate education, studying painting at University of Central Florida. And I took a painting class, as one does, and he was my professor. So Key Francis is his name, and there was already kind of like a cohort of about 6 to 8 students that were very tight. Um, and we had all ended up taking this painting class and heard great things about him. And he wasn't teaching very frequently at that time.
Mm,
Anyways, and then we all just kind of clicked with him. He was a very like honest, um, he's an honest educator about like what it means to be in a professional role as an artist. And so what he did that set him out from so many other professors was he was teaching us how to build contracts, how to build relations, send out emails, how to make frames, in addition to teaching us about like how to make a great painting, right? And how to mix your own paints from pigments, like things that you don't get that often. And so he retired a semester before I graduated, and
mm,
he is from Tupelo, Mississippi. So he had family land up in Tupelo, and he and his wife decided to move back, and he was going to go back to being a professional artist. So after I graduated, after I'd already spent a few semesters learning with him, and he actually taught me printmaking. He introduced it to me. He was looking at my paintings and he was seeing what I was doing in my process. And he said, I think that you should try woodcut printmaking because I'm seeing what you're doing and I think it would be really helpful, beneficial. And it was right. I mean, sometimes when you're painting, it's a very fast medium. So I was wood block printing really slowed me down and helped me in my image making, and helped me to reflect a little bit better on what I was making. So that and a whole host of other reasons. When he left, he sent an invitation. He gave us an invitation essentially that like if we needed a place to print, that we could come up to Mississippi and continue to work with him. And so 3 of us who had already graduated took that invitation seriously. I think he was a little surprised that we were serious about it, and we rallied and we were on our way to moving to Mississippi and getting really excited about this new journey. And we had all applied to graduate school right before this, and all of us had gotten our respective rejection letters. And as we were getting ready to move to Mississippi, I find out that I was waitlisted, um, and that I actually have a new spot for graduate school, with a full stipend and a fully paid for master's degree program. So uh, while I was like really stoked to go to Mississippi, I also decided to take that opportunity. And while everyone went up there, I went further north to Philadelphia instead, actually. Yeah, so that's like kind of the beginning of that journey into deeper mentorship with Key as well.
yeah, and eventually you did make it back to Mississippi, but with
Mhm.
more experiences under your belt. And, you know, I think, one of the ways as somebody who's interacted with more artists in recent years, you know, um, you're so lucky to kind of have this um nurturing in the business of art, and like what are ways to save money to be able to sort of make and create in ways to generate abundance. And so um segueing into that topic a little bit more, can you tell us the story of the circumstances which led to you working with your first art dealer, and
Mhm.
then why you really appreciate them and your relationship over the years.
Yeah, for sure. So, um, Lion, as you mentioned before, I'm originally from Maui. And when my brother and I moved out of the house, my parents decided to move back to Hawaii and relocated back to Oahu. Um, and so ever since then, visiting my parents and continuing my art practice, uh, I had shown some things in Hawaii and just like was active in that community, getting to know people over there. And when I was in graduate school, I received a message just like through Facebook Messenger from Kelly, an art dealer in Hawaii who had heard of my work through someone else and was just like, he represents Hawaiian artists. And he saw my work and reached out. Um, I was not sending the work out to very many places. I think I had some experience with the gallery there on Oahu at the time. And so he reached out and wanted to work with me, and thus the like business, more serious business side of my art practice was born, pretty much because he works with not just residential clients and collectors, but also commercial buildings and some of the hotels around the islands. And so basically we just started with one project at a time, just to see how we work together. And I just sent some prints out in a tube, some of my woodcut prints, and he would place them. Um, and we still work together now. So it was just like this kind of serendipitous occurrence. I felt like such great luck. And I was ready for it. I had all these prints already that were made. So, the other thing that Key always mentions is like luck is one factor to the equation of like being a successful artist. It's also like the preparedness on the back end, right? To have those opportunities and to be able to step forward towards them when they're presented to you. And yeah, so that's how that has occurred. And it's always been like a really lovely relationship. He represents me for all of Hawaii. And so he deals with all of the interior designers and manages the projects. And I make the work and get to send it to him. And so it's been wonderful jumping off point for my professional life.
Amazing. Now, as fruitful as that relationship has been over the years, um, you have also had some more challenging interactions with galleries and, professionals working in art. Um, are you able to share, generally an experience and some of the learnings, um, that you've incorporated as part of your philosophy and sort of dealing with those types of interactions and yeah.
Yeah, sure. So, one of my first galleries that I worked with ended up selling some of my work and never communicating that to me. And I found out through other people that my work was placed. And when I reached out to them, they said they did sell it, but they didn't have the money to pay me. And so I never got paid for that work. I decided to, I pulled the rest of my work out of that gallery and just left it at that. I just like wanted to cut the tie and not like come back over and over again to get the money for a piece. And that's just a decision that I made. But it's not uncommon. Like I have many friends who are also artists who hear that galleries are dropping the ball on communication or like with clients, or they're dropping the ball by not paying on time. And I think it's just like a reflection of, how the world is. And it's like we're not separate from how humans interact with each other. And so, um, what I've done so far is like going forward is I do kind of like a temporary contract with galleries, and just we feel it out together to see if we're a good fit for each other. Maybe we'll do one show first and then we will go forward if they feel like we're a good match. Because it is a relationship at the end of the day, even though it's a business relationship, it's important to really reflect on how you're feeling about it, and that it's a secure one.
Yeah. Thank you for that. So, one of the things, just to sort of provide a little context to our audience before we dive into it, is as an artist, as a working artist, as an artist that's generated abundance through their art, you've had, um, you know, sizable portions, periods of time where you weren't fully focused on your art, you know?
Mhm.
That could be some of your time spent in Mississippi, um, when you were sort of, doing more gardening, or when you sort of ventured out as an entrepreneur, starting a business, a sustainable gardening, and you know, basically a whole enterprise around sustainable gardening, with your friend, or while you were building your own tiny home, and God knows how many other instances. Um, and, you know, as an artist, are you able to speak to sort of, you know, were there any challenges for you to sort of step away from your art in the way that maybe you were used to doing? And like what um what your experience with that was like. Was it challenging? Did it feel natural to do that? Were you reassured, in your decisions? And so ultimately, this is about, stepping away from your art to focus on something else, and how, you justified that, how you know, um, yeah, how you made that decision, and what that was like. Because I know for myself as an artist, um, sometimes I can grapple with anxiety when it comes to, not focusing, X amount of my energy on.
Yeah, absolutely. What a good question. And I feel like there's so many like layers to this experience that I've had. I feel like there's days when I am itching and required to make work. It's like that internal like must not ignore, just for like my own emotional upkeep. Um, but on those projects that I decide to take on, I think that my personality is like I get excited about something and then I'm going to just see it through. And so there's this aspect of my being that kind of takes over in that way. And so in that way, the other like art making side of me is kind of calmed for a moment because we know we have this other task at hand, right? Whether that's um, starting the garden design business and taking on a lot of those projects, or it's building a tiny house. But I think the more important way that I'm able to manage that is that I learned a long time ago, I think because I always made art off and on between working jobs and even before I was like a professional artist, I was always just like making art on the side. So I don't visualize it as something that can really be separated from who I am or that I can detach from. It's like this deep contract that I've made with myself from a very young age. And also, if you're a creator, there's this side that's just very addicting to creating and making and reflecting and composting your experience. So um, I see those non art projects as my research. So some artists do like real like sit down book reading, writing, research, and I do that around pieces. But I think my practice is just, I work in abstraction, and so I think my research is also in abstraction. So like I get to like live my life, work on my foraging skills, my garden design, my collaborative skills with my community, my building skills, and that gets reflected in the work. Because when I was a child, with my grandfather and even with my parents, my mom, my dad, we were outside. I had already had this like other visual skill of looking and note taking just like in my mind, right? So it's like, okay, if I'm like out building a garden and a color is juxtaposed with another shape that I think is just like outrageously beautiful, I will just like look at it, try to imprint it, and move on and keep working, And I think that that really comes out in the work over time. And so I see my work as a reflection of just like the moves that I make in the world. And so that makes it a lot easier when I'm not in the studio making all the time. I know that my body, just like this earth, like stores my history, and that history is going to come out, and I don't really have to like push it out. It's just going to flow over the years of training it to flow out of my being.
Hell yeah. I feel your power and sort of the the peace in the words that you share and the reassurance that it's all interconnected,
Mm.
and that your non artwork is still contributing to your art practice in ways
Yeah,
that are magical. Yeah.
and I just want to like add this thing that I forgot to say is that like ultimately like we're channels, right? So like we're just channeling work anyway. So like I think that takes the pressure off it as well, right? As artists, we are just like channeling the ideas through our being to come out that want to be birthed into the world. And like I think that also takes the pressure off of not making, right? Like when the channel's clear and open, um, then the work will come through.
Hell yeah. Thank you for, making the time to share that piece. With that, let's talk about one of your other pieces, shall we?
Sure, let's do it.
So tell us about this desert bouquet.
Yeah. So I recently moved to San Francisco. And when I did that, I drove myself and my materials down, is it I-10 that goes through like the desert from Mississippi? And again, was not drawing on my drive, was not like, I was taking some photographs in this like beautiful colored landscape through the desert. Um, but as everyone knows, like photographs don't do the justice to what light is happening in a landscape and sunsets and the color. So um, I was starting an artist residency in Berkeley at Kala Art Institute, and I got situated, and this is one piece out of probably like 12 to 15 pieces in a collection that are all desert bouquet pieces that I made right at the start of my residency. And so, like I said before, some of these blocks that are in this image were made before this time. And then there are some new ones in there. So like there's the large central block was made probably like 6, 7, 8 years ago. And then the color changed in this piece, right? So I was trying to portray the color of the desert. And then I just drew up some new blocks with stencils and some new forms I had taken photographs of. And this piece came out as part of this full series. So.
Wow. That's so in a way this is like your welcome to the North Bay
Yes.
installation,
Yeah.
your drive coming out.
Mm-hmm.
Amazing. Thank you for sharing that. So,
Mm-hmm.
um, shifting gears a bit, you know, I believe that energy is everything.
Mm-hmm.
Energy dictates what we put our attention to, and art takes a lot of energy, as
Mm-hmm.
as a lot of us know. And nurturing relationships, romantic relationships, takes a lot of energy. And I'd love to hear from you the story of you balancing, your passionate pursuit of art with a romantic partnership and sort of the experience of that interplay coming together to building a home, your tiny home.
Yeah, that sounds
And
yeah, that was a wild experience.
yeah,
um, so when I was living in Mississippi, I had lived there for a year at the time, and I was with my previous partner, and he was also an artist. We met in art school. And so as far as like the tiny house timeline goes, we were going to lose our space that we were living in. Um, and he was about to go to graduate school. And so I had already cultivated this um, new relationship with more of Key's family. So his daughter lived on the property with Key, and we were gardening together. And I became friends with his granddaughter as well. So we were just, I was really welcomed into the family, just like so many of us in our little cohort were. And so when we found out that we were going to have to move, um, this like crazy idea came into my partner's brain, which was to build a tiny house. And um, it was partially because our friend Carrie, Key's daughter, had talked about how she wanted to create more community and have kind of those kinds of spaces on that property. And so we I listened, I heard him out, and I said, it's like, that's a great idea. I'd love that. And so we talked to Carrie, we talked to Key, and we had about 2 or 3 weeks pretty much until Jaeger had to go to graduate school in Iowa. So it was like a now or never situation because he had worked for a construction company in Mississippi. So we both had some building skills from like sculpture classes, but he really honed those and learned a lot of things in that job. And so I went on a mad research hunt and was just watching all the YouTube videos about tiny houses, looking at all the different ways, watching people build them out, and came upon a plan that you can buy for $30 for an A-frame tiny house. And I don't know, my heart was just like, that's the one. Like, we're going to do it that way. And it was tiny. It was 8 by 10 feet floor plan. Like, it is a square. A-frame, though. So even less space. And yeah, we basically just took to it and built it in 2 weeks. So we used some reclaimed materials. and just worked our butts off. And that's all we did for 2 weeks in between um, jobs and other projects that were already in line. And I would say to your question about relationships and balancing that and growing them in conjunction with your art practice, I think with Jaeger, it was very fluid because he is an artist. And so our art practices were already like so intermingled into our relationship. We were talking about our practices. We weren't making art together, but we were critiquing each other, helping each other all the time. So it was like a really beautiful, it was a beautiful relationship to build a career in and really grow up in, you know. And I would say that there was a pretty easy understanding that the work, the artwork was really high on both of our priorities. So it was very helpful in that way, I think, to keep balance and understanding. So I was very lucky in that way. But in other relationships, I think you just, I don't know. I mean, personally, like I love being in a relationship, both in love, but in friendship and in community. And I think like people really feed me. Like I am, yes, like an introverted when I'm making and I'm in my making space, but ultimately, like I would love to expand even further and do even more collaborative, larger projects with people. Because I think that these relationships, these conversations, they're like, they're the real work. They're the real fuel, right? Like I'm not making work for myself. I'm not making these objects to live in storage, right? They're a communication tool. Um, so yeah, I mean, they're like a central focus for, I think, like how the work is created as well.
Hell yeah. Thank you for sharing your wisdom.
Mm.
Um, so you, we already know you're an artist. And I want to remind the audience that you're not just an entrepreneur within the practice of your art, but you are also an entrepreneur with the sustainable design, garden design business that you started with your friend. And when we were together in preparation for today's episode, you mentioned total freedom for your time, having total freedom of your time. And this is connected to the following question, which talks about, waking up to abundance and, the different ways in which abundance, looks like. And obviously having freedom over your time, I think is worth more money, worth more than money. So I want to, put a pin in that one for our audience. But, when you first talked about this total freedom of your time, one of the first things that came up for me as somebody who resonates with that is the madness associated with, how you navigate that total freedom in time. And that can look, different ways for different people. It can be, varying degrees of franticness depending on who you are. And so, can you please paint a picture of what that meant for you, how it challenged you, and how you navigated it and harnessed that power, you know? Because ultimately, it's that harnessing. But yeah, please.
Yeah. So I think, like anything else, it's a practice, right? So I am also guilty of like experiencing the madness of too much freedom of time, right? Um, but I think that on the other like side of that perspective, you could say that, like, well, how else would I have built a tiny house without that freedom of time? How else would I have started a garden design business without, like, the madness of that ability, right? So I think there's so many um, endless benefits to that. And lately, I've been thinking about what, like, productivity looks like for different people, right? And so I think it's something that we have to keep in mind as artists and creatives of any kind, and even non-creatives, is like we're in this time where we're pushing the boundaries of what our, like, productivity can look like, what our labor is valued as, and what our labor can look like, what our rest can look like, how that can be integrated. And so that's what I've been thinking a lot about lately. I know it's like kind of veering off the path a little bit of the freedom of time, but I think that there's always going to be some kind of challenge in my perspective, right? Like, I think we all have like these days that are challenging perspectives. And I think we just have to like take it one day at a time, try to stay focused and have faith that we are like stepping in our purpose or in our um, just with intention, right? It's like, how do we connect back to that original intention? You know, whether it's like beyond the immediate projects at hand, but like, is that immediate project connected to that core intention of why ever it is the reason that you create? I think helps me just kind of wrangle myself back. And also I'm learning in these past few years that like art practice is so all over the place, and I am just trying to practice gratitude for the ability to even be able to make anything. Practice gratitude that I had people in my life like he, like my mentors, like my friends that have enabled me to be where I am today. So I think like my practice right now is like big gratitude, big to keep my like madness and like self-criticism in check. When the freedom of time um, clicks into my like self-doubt and self-judgment, right? Because that's a problem for me anyway. It's like, it's not the freedom of time that's the issue, it's the like madness and the productivity level, and then making sure we're making enough, and then the criticism, and like that used to be a driver, right? Like as you're younger, it's like that drive to make things and be great, and like, okay, like some of that aggression can drop. um and how do we just like chill in the time and trust that the work's going to get made in the right way?
Hell yeah. Very, very beautifully said. The one thing that came up when we were talking about this is I love the term you coined, well, that you shared, your addiction to learning.
Oh, yeah, I
Um,
forgot about that.
so tell us more about that and like, sort of your experience with that. If if there are ways that you sort of try to modulate that as part of just, doing more to check in with yourself, with your intuition, and, creating more grace, as you mentioned.
Mhm. So, I think a part of my somewhat erratic personality is the benefit, like I had mentioned earlier, is that like this hyper focus and interest in certain things, right? So, learning about vermicomposting, which is like using earthworms to compost, things like of that nature that are just these like random things. I figured out this like passion for learning when I went to grad school because I had I was getting a stipend, so I didn't have to work for the first time since I was I don't know, like 13. I didn't have to like have a side job um, when I was also in school. And I remember calling my mom one day and being like, I have all this capacity. I have all this like attention. I have all this energy. Like I can really study. And that's when like the botanical research really kicked in. And so that was like one key moment for me was that like you just have to put your energy in the right spaces and use your energy wisely. But then there was another time when I started writing poetry that I really realized that all these things that I had learned about making visual art can be applied to a completely different medium. And I took the pressure off myself because I said, I'm not formally trained in writing. So I'm just going to write. And if it turns out like shit, I'm just going to be like, oh, well, I'm not like formally trained. I'm just like here. I'm just here writing, you know? And so I kind of have been placing that um, in all these different avenues. It's like it's not my not my field. I'm just here learning and enjoying it. And so yeah, this addiction to learning started, I would say, started in grad school because I realized how I learned best when I was in grad school. What are the tools, right? Like I'm a tactile learner. If I'm not writing it down, it's not cementing in my brain. Um, if someone's just saying something to me, it's just going to go right through my brain. But that's not like a negative thing, right? It's like how do I harness the way that I learned best to like enjoy and love and play in my learning practice. So yeah, I'm addicted to to learning new things, and I look forward to the next rabbit hole that I'm gonna wind up in. So
Hell yeah. Thank you for that. Um, so going back to the abundance and opportunity before we bring today's episode to a close, um, we we covered a few examples already. You know, we talked about having full freedom over your time. We talked about having an amazing mentor like Key. Some of the other instances that came up was you being able to run a commercial sized greenhouse as part of, the business that you were growing, and working with children being one of the most abundant times for you, and how you got to sort of nourish their minds. um, so I'd love for you to sort of pick one of them and expound on, how these opportunities came into your life, as a result of you choosing the artist's way, right? Um,
mm,
as more proof of the abundance, a more expansive view of abundance, and a rich life.
mm. So the first thing that comes to mind now is just like redefining abundance, right? So it's like so often it's abundance is tied to this physical coin, but the coin is just a tool for us to get us to where we want to be or get us the things that we need. And sometimes the things that we desire are like available to us beyond having to go through the coin. And I feel like my abundance has been through relationships. Um, cultivating that relationship with Key, and I could have just let it go separate ways, and I could have not gone to Mississippi, and I could have paid for my own studio. Um, Instead, I went and decided to be in community with folks that I love, and I was rewarded with this space. With the garden design company Phlox Design, I was rewarded with a beautiful friendship already with my friend Chas. And she had an idea and this vision. And I said, I think we have the manpower between the two of us to make this vision a reality. And that led to another job 2 years later of working with children. And I think, it enabled me this opportunity, that job working in the school system in Tupelo enabled me to see so many skills that I did not know that I had. It enabled me to help my community abundantly, right? So they had this beautiful commercial sized greenhouse. And as soon as I walked into that space, I said, let's make this thing like run, grow as much as possible. So we were also able to like grow plants for Flock's design in this greenhouse, and for the school system and for a neighboring school system we provided plants for. And then in addition to like filling the school garden beds, and if plants are not the original vision of abundance, I don't know what is, like personally. So that was such like a huge abundant time, and then having the gift of like experiencing children's viewpoint of what it means to plant a seed, water a plant, play with a bug, play in the dirt, be outside. Um, there's no money that you can like pay for that experience, right? And it feeds me endlessly now and like drives me now. And it's something that I look forward to hoping to do here in San Francisco, is working with more community. And so I think like I even have to remind myself of like the diversity of abundance and what that means, right? I mean, I was feeding myself by working at a farm when I was in Mississippi for once a week in exchange for a share of um, organic food that was raised by my community. So I had this very fresh, just picked food from like a mile down the road from my house that I was getting to eat, that was nourishing my body and healing my body. Which maybe in other instances I would have had to get a job to be able to afford that kind of food to heal myself, right? I didn't have any like very specific illness, but I think like when you switch to eating those kinds of foods, there's a lot of healing that happens. Um, so that's why I say that. But yeah, I think uh, practicing shifting the mindset of abundance is such a good practice that I even need to work on, that I'm glad that you are bringing to my attention line. Is like, I feel like in this conversation, you're helping me find these new definitions for what abundance really is. So I appreciate that.
Well, I appreciate you, Nicole, and I think that waking up to, a more expansive view of abundance is so important, not just for more grateful living, but also, we live in very interesting times. I mean, we're at the precipice of artificial intelligence really transforming the way that we live, in a high income country like the US. And waking up to the diversity of different ways in which abundance shows up, I
Mm,
think will be a very important way that not just artists, but really, I think ultimately this message applies to everybody,
mm,
every human who would be impacted by the change in AI and how that might impact your financial abundance, right? Because
mhm,
so much of people's self-worth um, is tied to financial abundance, and being that provider, or whatever, role that you take on. And it can be self-detrimental because it's limiting us, and can cause a calamity within us when that sort of, transforms, right?
mhm,
And changes. But hope is not lost because we are surrounded by abundance of different
Mhm.
forms.
Mhm.
Um, and that's why, today's episode is so important. That's why your presence is so cherished. Your inspiration. I mean, today's topic came about, as a result of, you sharing and sort of guiding me in this direction, and now here we are, you know. Man, we're
Yeah,
both
it's
mad.
great.
Because I'm just like so taken aback and so in awe of like how this little seed that we planted when we first met took on a life of its own, and the
Mm,
energy you put into this. And I'm so grateful to you for not just your presence, your existence. You are a blessing, and
mm.
I hope that you are able to shower more blessings upon this world as you realize more of them within yourself. Are there any last words that you have before we close up shop for the day?
I just wanna give a big thank you to you, Lion. This is my baby's first podcast, so super exciting, and you've been such a beautiful facilitator um, for this time together. So, just so grateful for that. Um, and I think that's it. I think there's a lot that came through earlier, and if there are people who wanna connect, feel free to reach out and connect, in all ways, garden ways, art ways. I'll say I'm like still new to San Francisco. So if there's people in San Francisco who want to do some crazy community art work and they need someone to help shovel some dirt, I'm out here putting the call out. Um, but that's it. I'm just so grateful for you hosting me.
Hell yeah, Nicole. And here's to more abundance, more community, more inspiration, more creativity. And with that, our lovely audience, till the next episode, love and light from Lion. Mwah, mwah, mwah.